Yo, good morning. Episode 4. If you remember, we were talking about Jim's fit last time, and now we're about ready to jump into the woods and start the season. Most of this took place in the first 3 or 4 days. We started in easy, each one admitting to the other that he was soft from the winter, and besides, Jim hadn't finished giving me his course on pimping. Pimping is a little bit more complicated than the innocent bystander might think. Besides selecting a whore, big as well as southern, i.e. poetical, and keeping her happy by taking her to the Bijou Theater in the afternoons and hustling, which meant rounding up all the Swedes and Finns and French Canadians you had known in the woods, you also had to be your own bootlegger. It was still prohibition. And your own bouncer, which introduced a kind of sporting element into the game. But after a few days of resting every hour, we had pretty well covered the subject, and still nobody seemed interested in bringing up socialism. I suppose that at an early stage in coming in to hate someone is just running out of things to talk about. I thought then it didn't make a damn bit of difference to me that he liked his whores big as well as southern. Besides, we were all getting into shape a little. We started skipping the rest periods and took only a half hour at lunch, and at lunch we sharpened our axes on our stones. Slowly we became silence, and silence itself is an enemy to friendship. When we came back to camp, each went his own way, and within a week we weren't even speaking to each other. Well, this in itself didn't need to be ominous. Lots of teams of sawyers work in silence because that's pretty much the kind of guys they are, and of course because no one can talk and at the same time turn out thousands of boards of feet. Some teams of sawyers even hate each other and yet work next to each other year after year, something like an old New York Knicks or Celtics basketball team, knowing the other guy's moves without even troubling to look. But our silence was different. It didn't have much to do with efficiency and big production. When he broke the silence to ask me if I would like to change from a 6 to a 7-foot saw, I knew the sawing was for survival. The 6-foot blade was plenty long for the stuff we were carving and sawing, and that extra foot would have been only to be more for me to pull. It was getting hot and I was half sick, and when I came back to camp at the end of the day, I would dig into my duffel bag and get clean underwear, clean white socks, and a bar of soap and go to the creek. Afterwards, I would sit on the bank until I was dry. Then I would feel better. It was a rule I had learned in my first year of working in the Forest Service. When exhausted and feeling sorry for yourself, at least change your socks. I'll take that. On the weekends, I spent a lot of time washing my clothes. I washed them carefully, and I expected them to be white, not gray, when they had dried on the brush. At first, then, I relied on small home remedies such as cleanliness. I had a period, too, when I leaned on Proverbs, and I tried to pass the blame back on myself with some justification. All winter, I had a fair notion that something like this would happen. Now I would try to be philosophical by saying to myself, well, pal, if you fool around with the bull, you're going to have to expect the horns. But when you are gored, it is not much comfort in Proverbs. Gradually, though, I began to fade out of my own picture of myself and what was happening, and it was he who controlled my thoughts. In my dreams, some of which I had during the day, I was always pulling a saw, and he was always on the other end of it, getting bigger and bigger, but his face getting smaller and smaller and closer, until it finally must have been cut through the log. And with no log between us now, it threatened to continue down the saw until it ran into me. It sometimes came so close that I could see how it got smaller by twisting and contracting myself around its nose. And somewhere along here in my dream, I would wake up from the exertion of trying to go back away from what I was dreaming about. At a later stage of my exhaustion, there was no dream, no sleep, just a constant awareness of being thirsty, and that of a succession of events of such a low biological order that normally they escaped notice. All night, sighs succeeded grunts and grumblings of the guts. And about an hour after everyone was in bed and presumably asleep, there were attempts at homosexuality. Fuck. Usually unsuccessful. The statistics I started to keep were at representative. Jesus Christ. The bunkhouse would become almost silent. Suddenly, somebody would jump in bed, punch another somebody, and mutter, "You filthy son of a bitch." And then he would punch 4 or 5 times more, fast, hard punches, and then the other somebody never punched back. Instead of trying to be silent, he grieved footsteps and returned to bed. It was still early in the night, too early to start thinking about daybreak. You lay there quietly, thinking about the hours, feeling as if you spent all of your previous day drinking out of a galvanized pail. Eventually, every thought is water tasting like galvanized pail. After 2 or 3 nights of this, you came to know you could not be whipped. You probably couldn't win, but you couldn't be whipped. Damn, I think I'm going to end there. Whoo, we'll pick up this later. It ain't easy being a logger. Have a great day. Love you, bro.